My name is Roxy, and I'm 67 years old. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine walking into my own funeral. Yet there I was, standing at the back of the church, watching my son Jackson deliver a heartfelt eulogy about his beloved mother, who had tragically died in a hiking accident. The accident was real, but my death certainly wasn't. As I stood there, one question burned in my mind. How far would my only son go to get his hands on my inheritance? If you're watching this story, let me know where you're from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens when a dead woman crashes her own funeral. Life had been pretty good before everything fell apart. After my husband Robert passed away 10 years ago, I focused on building a life for myself. I'd retired from teaching high school English after 30 years and started a small bookstore cafe that had become quite successful in our community. I owned a beautiful home in an upscale suburb of Boston, had a healthy retirement fund, and my business was thriving. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was comfortable and independent, which I valued above all else. My son Jackson was 42, married to Amanda, and worked as a financial advisor. They had no children, something that disappointed me, but I respected their choice. Jackson had always been ambitious, even as a child. He was bright, determined, and had a way of getting what he wanted. As he grew older, I noticed he developed quite expensive tastes: designer clothes, luxury cars, and a house they could barely afford in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods. Our relationship had always been somewhat complicated. Jackson could be charming and attentive when he wanted something, but distant when life was going his way. Still, he was my only child, and I loved him deeply despite his flaws. I wanted to believe he loved me too, beyond what I could give him. Things changed dramatically about 8 months ago. I'd been considering my legacy and decided to make some adjustments to my will. My estate wasn't enormous, but between my home business and savings, it was worth close to $2 million. Originally, Jackson was set to inherit everything, but after much reflection, I decided to donate half to educational charities supporting literacy programs for underprivileged children. Teaching had been my passion, and I wanted my life's work to continue making a difference. I also decided to invest a significant portion of my liquid assets in expanding my bookstore business. An adjacent property had become available, and I saw an opportunity to grow. When I told Jackson about these plans over dinner one evening, his reaction was immediate and disturbing. "You're doing what?" he asked, his fork clattering against his plate. "Mom, that's insane. You're not a business mogul. You're a retired teacher who got lucky with a bookstore. You could lose everything." "I've done my research, Jackson. The business has been profitable for 7 years straight," I explained calmly. "And I'm not touching the money that's set aside for my living expenses and health care." "What about my inheritance?" he demanded, not even trying to hide his concern. "You're gambling with my future." His words stung. "Your future, Jackson. You're a successful professional with a good income. This money is mine to use as I see fit." The argument escalated when I mentioned the charitable donations planned in my will. Jackson's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Half of everything to charity. Are you serious? That's my birthright. You're giving away," he shouted. "Birthright, Jackson. I worked for 40 years to build what I have. It's mine to decide what happens to it." Amanda sat silently during our argument, but I noticed her shooting warning glances at Jackson, as if trying to get him to control his temper. The evening ended with Jackson storming out, claiming I'd been irresponsible with money since his father died. 2 weeks later, Jackson's attitude mysteriously changed. He called to apologize claiming he'd overreacted and just wanted me to be financially secure. He began visiting more frequently, bringing small gifts, asking about my health, and showing unusual interest in my business. At the time, I was relieved, believing we'd moved past the disagreement. Now I realize he was just laying the groundwork for what was to come. The invitation seemed innocent enough. Jackson suggested a weekend getaway at a cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. "You work too hard, Mom," he said. "Let Amanda and me take you somewhere peaceful. Just the three of us like old times." I was touched by the gesture. Perhaps our relationship was healing after all. The cabin was beautiful rustic, but comfortable, nestled in dense woods about 20 minutes from the nearest small town. The location was isolated, which Jackson said was perfect for disconnecting from the world and reconnecting with each other. On our second night, after a day of hiking and playing board games, Jackson brought up my will again, but in a much more measured tone. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about your legacy." He began, pouring me a glass of red wine. "I might have reacted poorly before. It's your money, and I respect your decisions." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for understanding, Jackson. That means a lot to me. I'm just curious about one thing," he continued, swirling his wine. "Have you finalized all the paperwork? Is everything official with your attorney?" "Not quite," I admitted. "Martin has the instructions, but we're meeting next week to sign everything." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, but his smile remained fixed. "That's good. It's important to get everything in order." Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jackson insisted on making me a special cocktail, a recipe he claimed to have learned from a bartender friend. "You'll love it, Mom. It's right up your alley." The drink tasted strange, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I sipped it slowly. Within 30 minutes, the world began to swim around me. My limbs felt heavy, and my thoughts became sluggish. "I don't feel well," I mumbled, struggling to stand. "Maybe you should lie down," Jackson suggested, exchanging a glance with Amanda that I couldn't interpret through my fog. "Let me help you to your room." That's the last clear memory I had. I woke up an unknown time later, alone in the cabin. Sunlight streamed through the windows, suggesting it was the next day. My head pounded, and nausea gripped my stomach. When I called out for Jackson and Amanda, only silence answered. Stumbling through the cabin, I found it completely empty. Their belongings were gone. My purse sat on the kitchen counter, but my cell phone was missing. Looking outside, I saw that their car was gone as well, leaving me stranded. Panic set in as I realized what had happened. My own son had drugged me and abandoned me in a remote location. But why? Then it hit me with horrible clarity. If I never returned home, if I died out here from exposure or some accident, the will wouldn't be changed. Jackson would inherit everything. I needed to find help. After searching the cabin, I found some bottled water and crackers, which I stuffed into a small backpack, along with a flashlight and matches. My plan was simple: follow the dirt road that led to the cabin until I reached the main road or found someone who could help. But my drugged state made the journey treacherous. About a mile down the road, dizzy and disoriented, I lost my footing on a steep embankment. I tumbled down a ravine, pain exploding in my head as it struck a rock. Darkness engulfed me, and I thought, this is it. This is how I die. I didn't die, though. I later learned that a hunter named Dave Thompson found me unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. He called emergency services, and I was airlifted to a small hospital in Lancaster, New Hampshire. But by then, I had no idea who I was or how I had ended up in those woods. I woke up in a hospital room, the steady beep of monitors, my only company. When a nurse entered, her face showed surprise at finding me conscious. "Well, hello there," she said warmly. "I'm Barbara. You're in Lancaster Memorial Hospital. How are you feeling?" I tried to answer, but found I couldn't remember my own name. Panic must have shown on my face because Barbara immediately moved to reassure me. "It's okay, honey. You've had a nasty head injury. Some confusion is normal. Can you tell me your name?" I don't know," I whispered, terrified by the emptiness where my identity should have been. "That's all right. We've been calling you Jane Doe for now. The man who found you said you didn't have any identification on you." Over the next few days, Barbara became my lifeline. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that somehow made the situation less frightening. The doctor explained I had a severe concussion and retrograde amnesia, but was optimistic my memory would return gradually. "The brain is a mysterious thing," he explained. "Sometimes memories come back all at once, sometimes in pieces, and sometimes something specific triggers them." For 2 weeks, I existed as Jane Doe, with only fragments of memories floating through my mind. The smell of old books, a classroom full of teenagers, a man's laugh that made my heart ache. Nothing concrete enough to tell me who I was. Then one morning, as Barbara helped me walk down the corridor for physical therapy, we passed a television in the common area. A news segment was playing, showing a photograph that stopped me in my tracks. "That's me," I gasped, pointing at the screen. Barbara looked from the television to my face, confusion evident. "Are you sure?" The caption under the photo read, Roxy Hartman, 67, of Wellesley, Massachusetts, presumed dead after hiking accident in White Mountains. "I'm Roxy." I whispered the name, unlocking a flood of memories. Roxy Hartman. Barbara immediately called for the doctor, who contacted the police. They pulled up the news story online, which reported that while my body had not been found evidence at the scene of an apparent fall, including blood and personal items, led authorities to believe I had died, and my body had been carried away by wildlife or washed away in a nearby stream. The article mentioned that my son Jackson Hartman had identified some of my belongings found at the scene, including my jacket and a distinctive silver bracelet my late husband had given me. A memorial service was being planned for the following week. As more of my memory returned, the horror of what had happened became clear. "My son did this," I told Barbara and the police officer who had come to take my statement. "He drugged me and left me in that cabin to die." The officer looked skeptical. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Hartman. Are you sure your memory is reliable?" "I'm sure of what happened at the cabin," I insisted. "I may not remember everything, but I know my son wanted my money, and he was angry about changes I planned to make to my will." The investigation moved slowly. Without proof beyond my testimony, the police were hesitant to act. Meanwhile, I learned from the newspaper that my memorial service was scheduled in 3 days at my family's church in Wellesley. "I need to go back," I told Barbara during her shift that evening. "I need to confront my son and stop whatever he's planning." "Roxy, you're still recovering, and if your son really did try to harm you, then going back could be dangerous." "He thinks I'm dead," I pointed out, "and I want to see his face when he realizes I'm not." Barbara sighed, recognizing the determination in my voice. "At least, let me help you make a plan. You can't just show up at your own funeral without support." Together, we crafted a strategy. I would return to Wellesley in time for the memorial service. Before revealing myself publicly, I would contact my attorney, Martin Goldstein, who would know how to handle the legal aspects of my resurrection. and could help me confront Jackson safely. The hospital released me the next day, though the doctor advised against travel. Barbara, on her day off, drove me to the bus station and gave me $300 from her own savings. "Pay me back when you've sorted out this mess," she said, hugging me goodbye, "and call me when you're safe." As the bus pulled away, headed south toward Boston, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I had no idea what awaited me back home, but I knew one thing for certain. My son had tried to kill me for my money, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The journey back to Wellesley was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. The bus ride took nearly 8 hours with multiple stops along the way. Each mile brought me closer to confronting the unimaginable betrayal by my own child. My head still ached from the injury, and anxiety kept me from sleeping during the overnight journey. I arrived in Boston early in the morning, exhausted and disoriented. My funeral was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. With Barbara's money, I bought some presentable clothes at a department store, since all I had were the donated items from the hospital. In the store's bathroom, I did my best to make myself look put together, though my reflection showed a woman who had been through hell, thinner, paler, with a partially healed cut on my forehead. Taking a suburban train to Wellesley, I found myself in the town I'd called home for decades, yet it felt somehow foreign now. I had a few hours before the service and needed to find Martin. I tried calling his office from a payphone, but his secretary informed me he was out for the day attending a memorial service. My memorial service. With no other options, I took a taxi to my neighborhood, asking the driver to stop a block from my house. I couldn't risk Jackson seeing me before I was ready. "You okay, lady?" the driver asked as I paid him. I must have looked as nervous as I felt. "Not really," I admitted. "I'm about to do something very difficult." He studied me for a moment. "Name's Harold. I get off my shift in an hour. If you need anything, call the dispatch and ask for me." He handed me a card with the taxi company's number. "Thank you, Harold," I said, genuinely touched by this stranger's kindness. I watched my house from a distance, hidden behind a neighbor's hedge. It looked exactly as I'd left it weeks ago, except for the black wreath on the front door. Cars were parked along the street, people in dark clothing entering my home. It appeared Jackson was hosting some kind of pre-funeral gathering. 2 hours later, I stood across the street from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, watching mourners arrive for my service. I recognized friends, former colleagues, neighbors, and distant relatives. It was surreal, like watching a movie of my own death. Then I saw Jackson and Amanda arrive, both dressed impeccably in black. Jackson accepting condolences with a solemn nod, Amanda's arm linked through his in support. I nearly lost my nerve then. What if no one believed me? What if Jackson had some explanation that would make me look crazy? But then I spotted Martin arriving, his familiar silver hair and dignified bearing unmistakable. This was my chance. I crossed the street quickly and intercepted him before he reached the church steps. "Martin," I said quietly, touching his arm. He turned, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized me. "Roxy, my God!" He stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "I'm so sorry to shock you," I said, guiding him to a bench away from the church entrance. "But I need your help." Once he recovered from the initial shock, Martin listened intently as I gave him an abbreviated version of what had happened. The drugged drink, waking up abandoned, the fall, the amnesia, and finally discovering my own death had been reported. This is unbelievable," Martin stammered. Jackson has been handling your estate. He brought in death certificates, witness statements. Everything seemed in order, if tragic. It was all a lie, I said firmly, and I need to confront him today with witnesses present. Martin nodded slowly, his legal mind clearly processing the implications. I'll call Detective Peters. He's a client and a friend. We need police present for this. He made the call from his cell phone, briefly explaining the situation. He'll be here in 15 minutes, Martin said after hanging up. Are you sure you want to do it this way? We could go to the police station first. No, I said, watching more people enter the church. This needs to happen now, before he gets access to my accounts. And I want everyone to see what he tried to do. When the detective arrived, we quickly briefed him on the situation. He was skeptical, but agreed to accompany us into the church, stating he would intervene only if necessary. The service had already begun when we entered through the back doors. Jackson stood at the pulpit, delivering what appeared to be a moving eulogy. A large photograph of me stood on an easel next to a tasteful flower arrangement. There was no casket, as my body had never been found. My mother was the most caring, generous person I've ever known, Jackson was saying, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. Her tragic accident has left a hole in my heart that can never be filled. I walked slowly down the center aisle, Martin and the detective flanking me. A gasp went up from the congregation as people noticed me. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and finally, Jackson looked up from his notes. The color drained from his face as our eyes met. "Mom," he whispered into the microphone, the word echoing through the stunned silence of the church. "Hello, Jackson," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the sanctuary. "I'm sorry to interrupt my own funeral, but as you can see, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Chaos erupted in the church. People stood from their pews, pointing and exclaiming. Some thought they were seeing a ghost. Others rushed forward to touch me to confirm I was real. Amanda, who had been seated in the front row, looked like she might faint. Jackson remained frozen at the pulpit, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, he managed to speak. "Mom, you're alive. It's a miracle." He rushed down from the pulpit toward me, arms outstretched as if to embrace me. I took a step back. "Don't touch me, Jackson." The detective moved slightly forward, positioning himself between us. "Everyone, please," Martin called out, his authoritative voice cutting through the commotion. "This is clearly a shocking moment for all of us. If you could please remain calm and seated, we can sort this out." The congregation reluctantly returned to their seats, though the murmuring continued. All eyes were fixed on the drama unfolding in the center aisle. "I don't understand," Jackson said, his voice carrying just the right note of confusion and joy. "They found your belongings, blood. The police said the evidence suggested you had fallen, and how did you survive? Where have you been?" "That's an interesting question, Jackson," I replied coldly, "especially since you were the last person to see me alive at the cabin right after you drugged my drink and left me there to die." Gasps echoed through the church. Jackson's face contorted in outrage. "That's insane, Mom. You must have hit your head. You're confused." He turned to the congregation. "My mother had an accident while hiking. She must have wandered off disoriented. Thank God she's alive, but clearly she's not well." "I was disoriented because you put something in my cocktail," I said firmly. "And then you and Amanda left me alone in that cabin, with no car, no phone, and no way to call for help." "This is absurd," Jackson exclaimed, looking around at the congregation for support. I would never hurt my mother. We had a wonderful weekend, and then Amanda and I had to leave early for a work emergency. Mom said she wanted to stay an extra day for some solitude. When she didn't come home as planned, I called the police immediately. The detective stepped forward. Mr. Hartman, I'm Detective Peters. Perhaps we should continue this discussion at the station. Am I being accused of something? Jackson demanded, based on the confused recollections of a woman who clearly suffered a traumatic brain injury. This is ridiculous. Just then, Amanda stood up from her seat. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. It's true, she said quietly. Jackson whirled to face his wife. What? It's true, Amanda repeated louder this time. Jackson planned it all. He put sleeping pills in Roxy's drink, and we left her there. He said she would just sleep it off, and then have to walk to town, maybe getting lost for a while. He said it would scare her into changing her mind about the will. I never thought, her voice broke. I never thought he meant for her to die. The church erupted again. Jackson's face twisted with fury as he lunged toward Amanda. You lying bitch! Two men from the congregation jumped up to restrain him as the detective moved in. Mr. Hartman, you're under arrest. You can't believe her, Jackson shouted as the detective handcuffed him. She's making this up. She's always been jealous of my relationship with my mother. As the detective recited Jackson's rights, another man stepped forward from the crowd. Actually, I have something to add, he said. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and outdoor clothing that stood out among the formal funeral attire. Who are you? The detective asked. Dave Thompson. I'm the hunter who found Mrs. Hartman in the woods. I came to pay my respects, but it looks like she didn't need them after all. He nodded respectfully to me. The thing is, when I found her, I also found a small metal flask nearby. I turned it over to the local police, told them it might be important. The detective made a note. We'll retrieve that as evidence. Jackson, now fully in panic mode, changed tactics. Okay, yes, I left her at the cabin. It was wrong, I know that now. But I never meant for her to get hurt. I just wanted to scare her a little, make her realize she needed me. I love my mother. And what about the memorial service? Martin asked coldly. You identified personal items as belonging to your deceased mother. Jackson's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Finding none, his shoulders slumped. It was just some old clothes and jewelry. When she didn't come home, and then they found those things in the woods with blood, I assumed the worst. You hoped for the worst, I corrected him. And who identified my body? I asked, since there wasn't one to be found. The detective looked at his notes. According to the report from New Hampshire, a hiker's body was discovered in the general search area, but it was too damaged by wildlife for visual identification. Dental records were pending, but Mr. Hartman provided a positive ID based on clothing and a distinctive watch. A convenient mistake, Martin observed. Or perhaps not a mistake at all. Jackson's face crumpled. I paid him okay, the medical examiner, $5,000 to say it was you. He said with the condition of the body, no one would question it. The revelation sent another shockwave through the congregation. The detective tightened the handcuffs. You've just added about 3 more charges to your list, Mr. Hartman. As they led Jackson out of the church, his final, desperate plea rang out. Mom, please, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your son. I watched him go, a strange numbness replacing the anger and hurt. No, I said quietly, though he couldn't hear me anymore. A son would never do what you did. Amanda stood alone now. tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Roxy. I never wanted any of this. Jackson said we were just giving you a scare, that you'd be fine. When they said they found evidence you might be dead, I thought it was a terrible accident. I never knew he paid someone to fake identify a body." I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I nodded acknowledgement of her apology. The detective instructed her to come to the station to provide a formal statement, suggesting she might want to contact an attorney of her own. Martin put his arm around my shoulders, steadying me as the reality of what had just happened threatened to overwhelm me. "Let's get you out of here," he said gently. "You've had quite enough for one day." As we turned to leave, my friends and neighbors surrounded me, offering support, asking questions, expressing their relief and shock. In that moment, despite the horror of what Jackson had done, I felt strangely blessed to see how many people truly cared about me. My funeral had become a resurrection in more ways than one. The days and weeks following my dramatic return from the dead were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and emotional reckonings. The case against Jackson moved quickly, bolstered by his confession in the church and Amanda's testimony. The New Hampshire medical examiner, who had falsely identified a body as mine, was also arrested and faced charges of his own. The body, it turned out, belonged to a hiker who had been reported missing months earlier. The man's family finally received the closure they deserved, though under terrible circumstances. Legally, resurrecting myself proved almost as complicated as the criminal case. Martin worked tirelessly to navigate the bureaucratic maze of reversing a death certificate, reinstating my Social Security benefits, and regaining control of my accounts, which Jackson had already begun to transfer into his name. In 40 years of practicing law, I've never had a case quite like this, Martin confessed during one of our many meetings. But we're making progress. The district attorney charged Jackson with attempted murder, elder abuse fraud, obstruction of justice, and a host of lesser charges. Facing overwhelming evidence, he accepted a plea deal, 20 years with the possibility of parole after 15. Amanda cooperated fully with the prosecution and received 5 years probation for her role. She filed for divorce while Jackson awaited sentencing and moved across the country to start a new life. I couldn't bring myself to hate her, believing she had been manipulated by my son, though I doubted we would ever speak again. The media dubbed my case the funeral crasher, and for several weeks, reporters camped outside my home, hoping for interviews. I declined them all, valuing my privacy, as I tried to process the trauma and betrayal. My physical recovery continued. The head injury had mostly healed, though doctors warned I might experience occasional memory issues or headaches for years to come. The emotional wounds were far deeper and showed no signs of healing quickly. Throughout this difficult period, unexpected support emerged from surprising places. Barbara, the nurse, who had cared for me in New Hampshire, drove down for Jackson's sentencing and ended up staying for 2 weeks, her compassionate presence a balm for my shattered spirit. Harold, the taxi driver, who had given me his card on the day of the funeral, checked in regularly, eventually offering to help with driving and errands when he learned I was sometimes too anxious to drive myself. His straightforward kindness gradually developed into a valued friendship. Dave Thompson, the hunter who had saved my life, refused any reward, but accepted my invitation to dinner whenever his work brought him to Massachusetts. His wife joined him on these visits, and the 4 of us often shared meals and conversations that helped anchor me to a new normal. On the day of Jackson's sentencing, I sat in the courtroom listening as the judge delivered a scathing assessment of his actions. "Mr. Hartman, the court finds your conduct particularly reprehensible, given the victim was your mother, who by all accounts had provided you with love support and significant financial assistance throughout your life. Your premeditated attempt to cause her death for financial gain demonstrates a disturbing lack of basic human decency." Jackson kept his eyes down, showing no emotion as the sentence was announced. Only when they led him away did he glance back at me, his expression unreadable. I wondered if he felt any remorse at all, or if he was simply sorry he had been caught. Outside the courthouse, reporters again clamored for a statement. This time, I decided to speak briefly. Justice has been served today, but there are no winners in this situation. I lost my son long before he tried to take my life. I just didn't realize it. Now I'm focused on healing and finding purpose in whatever time I have left. As cameras flashed and questions were shouted, Barbara slipped her arm through mine and led me away to where Harold waited with his taxi, ready to take me home to begin the next chapter of my life. 1 year after my funeral, I sat on my back porch with Barbara watching birds at the feeder I'd installed. She had relocated to Boston for a new nursing position and visited often, our friendship having become one of the unexpected gifts from my ordeal. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about how much has changed and how much I've changed," I replied. The past year had been a journey of healing and rediscovery. After the media frenzy died down, I'd thrown myself into therapy, working with a counselor, specializing in trauma and family betrayal. The process was painful, but necessary, forcing me to confront not only Jackson's betrayal, but also the signs I had missed throughout his life. I enabled his sense of entitlement. I admitted to Barbara. I always made excuses for his selfishness, his materialism. Even when Robert was alive, we both gave Jackson everything he wanted, believing we were showing love. "You can't blame yourself for his choices," Barbara reminded me, as she had many times. "Plenty of spoiled children don't try to murder their parents." She was right, of course, but understanding my role in Jackson's development was part of my healing. I needed to recognize the patterns to ensure I never repeated them in my new relationships. And there were many new relationships. Shortly after Jackson's sentencing, I joined a support group for survivors of family violence. Sharing my story with others who understood helped lessen the shame I had initially felt. How could I have raised a son capable of such cruelty? The group helped me see that love and good intentions weren't always enough to overcome whatever darkness lived in some people's hearts. Through the support group, I began volunteering with an organization that assisted elderly victims of financial abuse and exploitation. My experience gave me unique insight into the shame and betrayal these individuals felt, and helping them restored a sense of purpose I had lost. The bookstore continued to thrive, though I decided against the expansion I had originally planned. Instead, I used a significant portion of my assets to establish a foundation, providing educational opportunities for adults seeking second careers. We offered scholarships, mentoring, and networking support, with a particular focus on individuals over 50. The Roxy Hartman Second Chapter Foundation, Barbara said, smiling. "I still think the name is perfect." My relationship with money had changed dramatically. The inheritance Jackson had been so desperate to claim no longer seemed important to keep. I lived comfortably, but simply, finding more joy in using my resources to help others than in accumulating wealth for its own sake. Harold had become a regular fixture in my life as well. What began as occasional, friendly visits evolved into weekly dinner dates. At 63, he was a widower with grown children who lived out of state. His unpretentious humor and practical outlook on life provided a grounding presence I treasured. Harold called this morning. I told Barbara, "He's taking me to that new restaurant by the harbor tomorrow night." Barbara raised an eyebrow. "Sounds romantic." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "We're just friends." "For now," she teased. "But I've seen how he looks at you." The truth was, I wasn't opposed to the idea of romance with Harold. After decades of marriage to Robert, and then years of independence, I hadn't expected to find connection with someone new. But life, I had learned, was full of surprises, both terrible and wonderful. 3 months earlier, I had received a letter from Jackson. Martin had forwarded it after screening it for anything potentially disturbing. In careful handwriting, my son had expressed remorse, claiming the time in prison had forced him to confront his actions and their causes. He requested forgiveness and asked if I would visit him. The letter sat in my desk drawer, unanswered. I wasn't sure if his remorse was genuine or simply another manipulation. Either way, I wasn't ready to reopen that wound. Perhaps someday I would find it in my heart to visit him, to seek closure, if not reconciliation, but not yet. "Have you thought any more about Jackson's letter?" Barbara asked, seeming to read my mind. "Every day," I admitted. "But I've realized something important. Forgiveness isn't an obligation. It's a gift we give ourselves when we're ready. And I'm not ready yet." She nodded understanding in her eyes. "And that's perfectly okay." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across my garden, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. I had experienced the worst betrayal imaginable, faced death, and returned to reclaim my life. The woman who walked into her own funeral a year ago was not the same woman sitting here now. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate, and paradoxically, more trusting of the right people. "Sometimes," I said softly, "death isn't the end of your story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a new chapter, where you learn who you truly are and what really matters." Barbara squeezed my hand. "And what matters to you now, Roxy?" I gestured to the peaceful scene around us, to the symbol of the new life I had built from the ashes of betrayal. This, connection, purpose, living each day fully aware of its preciousness. The evening breeze carried the scent of the roses I had planted in spring, a season of renewal after the long winter of trauma. I had survived not only my son's betrayal, but also the darker aftermath of doubt, fear, and grief. I had built something new and meaningful from the wreckage of what was lost. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to thank you. Have you ever experienced betrayal that forced you to reinvent yourself? How did you find the strength to begin again? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to build a beautiful life even after unimaginable betrayal. Remember, sometimes our greatest challenges lead us to our most authentic selves. Until next time, take care of yourselves and those you love.